This is a test of the videotape equipment being prepared to be used for the Ferlinghetti Poetry Series reading, scheduled for Sunday, September the 30th at the Everhart Museum.
Thank you. I'm going to read from two books. One is the selected poems. These are New Directions books, by the way. And one is selected poems. It's called Endless Life, and has a lot of old goldies in it. And then a new book. So I think, I don't know exactly how long, but as long as you can sit still for it and don't fall asleep. What I find missing in poetry today is passion, and I've thought of a new definition of poetry, which is life perceived with passion. It's I don't find any excitement in poetry right now, and in the manuscripts coming in to our great publishing house. And from that point of view, it's really a definition that I'd like to test out to see whether my own poems hold up to it. A life perceived with passion. Some of these will make it, some won't. This is the first poem in A Coney Island of the Mind. In Goya's greatest scenes, we seem to see people of the world exactly at the moment when they first attain the title of suffering humanity. In a veritable rage of adversity, heaped up, groaning with babies and bayonets under cement skies, escape of blasted trees, bent statues, bats' wings and beaks, slippery gibbets, cadavers and carnivorous cocks, and all the final hollering monsters of the imagination of disaster. They are so bloody real, it is as if they really still existed. And they do. Only the landscape is changed. They still are ranged along the roads, plagued by legionnaires, false windmills, and demented roosters. They are the same people, only further from home, on freeways 50 lanes wide, on a concrete continent spaced with bland billboards illustrating imbecile illusions of happiness. The scene shows fewer tumbrils, but more spaced out citizens in painted cars, and they have strange license plates and engines that devour America. Coming over on 84 from the Hudson this afternoon. I was thinking of that. I think the freeways are wider in California, matter of fact. Well, from A Coney Island of the Mind, just a random selection. Constantly risking absurdity and death whenever he performs above the heads of his audience, the poet, like an acrobat, climbs on rhyme to a high wire of his own making, and balancing on I-beams above a sea of faces, paces his way to the other side of day, performing entreshots and sleight of foot tricks and other high theatrics, and all without mistaking anything for what it may not be. For he's the super-realist who must perforce perceive taught truth before the taking of each stance or step in his supposed advance toward that still higher perch where beauty stands and waits with gravity to start her death-defying leap. And he, a little Charlie Chaplin man, who may or may not catch her fair eternal form, spread-eagled in the empty air of existence. Another way of putting it, it's easy for a poet to make a fool of himself by sticking his neck out too far. But the older you get, the less afraid you are to make a fool of yourself. I mean, after a certain age, what the hell? So the Charlie Chaplin image at the end of this poem reminds me how important Chaplin has always, the image of Chaplin's little man has always been for me. And I think he's still so important for everybody because he sort of represents the subjective in everyone. The little man inside of everyone, or the little woman. And it's a matter of the subjective man who's constantly being erased by modern civilization, by the state or by industrial civilization in general. The subjective in everyone is constantly being killed off. And I think that's why Chaplin's little man is still such a great symbol for us, because he represents this free little individual against the monster state or against the monster civilization. And so he's kind of like sort of represents the poet. And the poet is sort of a natural born enemy of the state, because who else is going to defend the free individual? The government's always taking away your rights, more and more restricting your activities. Think of all the laws you had to obey just to get here tonight. And so it's whether it's in a capitalist or communist state, you're always being, the free individual, eros, the eros, E-R-O-S, in everyone is constantly being monitored and censored. And especially under Reagan, where you find him, you sort of have a creeping McCarthyism starting up again with civil rights being surreptitiously circumscribed and monitored and cut down by administrative fiats or administrative letters between departments, for instance, on the regulations for wiretapping. Things that are being done. The Supreme Court in the last year having ruled in many cases against civil liberties, cutting them down here and there. So this is all what makes the poet the natural born enemy of the state. I've got a new poem I'll read later on about that. Well, maybe I should throw it in here. This it fits in here so well. This is this poem is one that just barely got into this book. I think it was the last one I wrote in this before. He with the beating wings. The lark has no tree, the crow no roost, the owl no setting place, the nightingale no certain song, and he with the beating wings no place to light in the neon dawn. His tongue too long ago retuned by those ornithologists the state has hired to make sure the bird population of the world remains stable and pinioned. There is no need to clip its claws, its tongue will do. Tether to the tongue, and all falls fallow. The wild seed drops into nothingness. Tether to the tongue, and all falls into silence. A condition ever desired by tyrants, not least of which is the great state, with its benevolent bird watchers, with their nets and binoculars, watching out for the wild one, he that bears Eros like a fainting body, he that bears the gold bow, he with the beating wings. into any more tirades about the poet as the enemy of the state, but I'll go back to A Coney Island of the Mind and a few other selections from it. I find a visual excitement in poetry is something that I always want to get, and I don't find that much modern poetry. Since E.E. Cummings, for instance, who seems to be a poet nobody mentions anymore, you get a visual excitement. And often I'll be turned on just by watching a scene in a street or in a park or a cafe. I've got a lot of poems like that here that just observation. It seems to me so many poets, they walk down the street these days, they don't see anything. Or they're contemplating their navel. Or they're writing language poems, so-called, which is a tautology in itself. Poetry about poetry, language about language. Instead of looking outward, this is, it started out as an exercise in pure observation, being as objective as I could, like a camera eye, but you can't be objective. In the end, your own, the lens itself interprets. In Golden Gate Park that day, a man and his wife were coming along through the enormous meadow, which was the meadow of the world. He was wearing green suspenders and carrying an old beat-up flute in one hand, while his wife had a bunch of grapes, which she kept handing out individually to various squirrels, as if each were a little joke. And then the two of them came on through the enormous meadow, which was the meadow of the world. And then at a very still spot where the trees dreamed and seemed to have been waiting through all time for them, they sat down together on the grass without looking at each other, and ate oranges without looking at each other, and put the peels in a basket which they seemed to have brought for that purpose without looking at each other. And then he took his shirt and his undershirt off, but kept his hat on sideways, and without saying anything, fell asleep under it. And his wife just sat there, looking at the birds which flew about, calling to each other in the stilly air, as if they were questioning existence or trying to recall something forgotten. But then finally, she too lay down flat and just lay there, looking up at nothing, yet fingering the old flute which nobody played, and finally looking over at him without any particular expression except a certain awful look of terrible depression. Well, I find it's like, it could be Jonathan Swift or a space traveler landing on Earth as if it were a strange planet. And when I walk down the street, I have that feeling. Or when you're traveling, you really can do that. You feel like, what is this strange place I've suddenly been let down into? And you see all these long white animals walking around on their rear legs. And what is this? What's going on down here? And so I have a feeling of constant amazement. Maybe it's because I never grew up. Like a little kid, you see a kid, 1 year old, walking along, he's looking at everything like he's amazed completely. Well, I still get that feeling. And I get an awful lot of poems, observation poems like that. I hadn't... well, here's an observation. In San Francisco, there was a statue being put up by Benny Bufano in front of a Catholic church. And later, the priests changed in that church, and they didn't like the statue, and they had it taken away. I should have to write another poem called They Were Taking Down the Statue of St. Francis. This is called They Were Putting Up the Statue of St. Francis. They were putting up the statue of St. Francis in front of the Church of St. Francis in the city of San Francisco, in a little side street just off the avenue where no birds sang. And the sun was coming up on time in its usual fashion, and just beginning to shine on the statue of St. Francis where no birds sang. And a lot of old Italians were standing all around in the little side street just off the avenue, watching the wily workers who were hoisting up the statue with a chain and a crane and other implements. And a lot of young reporters in button-down clothes were taking down the words of one young priest who was propping up the statue with all his arguments. And all the while no birds sang any St. Francis passion, and while the lookers kept looking up at St. Francis, with his arms outstretched to the birds which weren't there, a very tall and very purely naked young virgin, with very long and very straight straw hair, and wearing only a very small bird's nest in a very existential place, kept passing through the crowd all the while, and up and down the steps in front of St. Francis, her eyes downcast all the while, and singing to herself. The poet's eye, obscenely seeing, sees the surface of the round world with its drunk rooftops and wooden oiseaux on clotheslines, and its clay males and females with hot legs and rosebud breasts in rollaway breasts, in rollaway beds, rollaway breasts. Involuntary surrealism, that's it. Just coined a new movement. Rollaway breasts, well. That reminds me of absolutely the worst pathetic typo in one of my poems that ever happened. I'll read you the poem. It was reprinted in the Penguin Book of Love Poems. And in the poem, it says, "Oh, lovely mammal." And the typesetter had said it as, "Oh, lovely mama," because the L had become an exclamation point, and the proofreader hadn't caught it. So it said, "Oh, lovely mama." So, I mean, it's... you can't do anything about it. You know, 50,000 copies are circulating the world with your lovely mama there. So I'll have to correct it, at least to read the poem the way it's supposed to be. This was the first poem in my very first book, which was called Pictures of the Gone World. A San Francisco poem. Away above a harbor full of caulkless houses, among the Charlie Noble chimney pots of a rooftop rigged with clotheslines, a woman paced up sails upon the wind, hanging out her morning sheets with wooden pins. Oh, lovely mammal, her nearly naked breasts throw taut shadows when she stretches up to hang at last the last of her so whitewashed sins. But it is wetly amorous and winds itself about her, clinging to her skin. So caught with arms upraised, she tosses back her head in voiceless laughter, and in choiceless gesture then shakes out gold hair, while in the reachless seascape spaces between the blown white shrouds stand out the bright steamers to kingdom come. Well, going back to the theme of life perceived with passion, see what I can find in this book. This is Sorolla's women in their picture hats, Sorolla was a Spanish Impressionist painter that seems to be practically unknown in this country, even though he has an entire museum in Madrid. Sorolla's women in their picture hats, stretched upon his canvas beaches, beguiled the Spanish Impressionists. And were they fraudulent pictures of the world, the way the light played on them, creating illusions of love? I cannot help but think that their reality was almost as real as my memory of today, when the last sun hung on the hills, and I heard the day falling like the gulls that fell almost to land, while the last picnickers lay and loved in the blowing yellow broom, resisted and resisting, tearing themselves apart again, until the last hot hung climax, which could at last no longer be resisted, made them moan. And night's trees stood up. I'm really reading at random, and I just enjoy reading these old poems. I'm going to get to the new ones soon. I guess it's one good test for a poem if you can read it years later and it doesn't sound awful. This is based on I was reading Freud's interpretation of dreams a long time ago, and there's an index you can look up your dreams, and I happened to be flipping through the index, and I saw a white string, so I looked up white string. Freud said if you dream of white string, it's a symbol of innocence. So I got this poem out of that somehow. With bells for hooves in sounding streets, that terrible horse, the unicorn, came on and cropped the meddler from a tree, and where he dropped the seed sprang up a virgin. Oh, she sprang up upon his back and rode off chittering to a stair where pieces of string lay scattered everywhere. Now when she saw the string so white, so lovely, and so beautiful, and looking like innocence itself, she got down and reached for a nice straight piece, but it had a head and it bit her beautiful place. So, she said, this is how it all began. Next time I'll know. But it was too late, and they buried her. But still, the world is a beautiful place to be born into. If you don't much mind happiness not always being so very much fun. If you don't mind a touch of hell now and then just when everything is fine. Because even in heaven, they don't sing all the time. The world is a beautiful place to be born into. If you don't mind some people dying all the time, or maybe only starving some of the time, which isn't half so bad if it isn't you. Yes, the world is a beautiful place to be born into. If you don't much mind a few dead minds in the higher places, or a bomb or two now and then in your upturned faces, or such other improprieties as our name brand society is prey to, with its men of distinction and its men of extinction, and its priests and other patrolmen, and its various segregations and congressional investigations and other constipations that our fool flesh is heir to. Yes, the world is the best place of all for a lot of such things as making the fun scene and making the love scene and making the sad scene and singing low songs and having inspirations and walking around looking at everything and smelling flowers and goosing statues and even thinking and kissing people and making babies and wearing pants and waving hats and dancing and going swimming in rivers on picnics in the middle of the summer and just generally living it up. Yes, but then right in the middle of it comes the smiling mortician. I often run into someone will come up to me at a reading. A woman will come up and say, "My mother caught me reading your poems under the covers when I was 14." And that seems to be, this is the poem that I ask them, well, which poem? And it's quite often this one. What could she say to the fantastic Foolie Bear? And what could she say to Brother? And what could she say to the cat with future feet? And what could she say to Mother after that time that she lay lush among the lolly flowers on that hot river bank where ferns fell away in the broken air of the breath of her lover, and birds went mad and threw themselves from trees to taste still hot upon the ground the spilled sperm seed? This really happened, unfortunately. See, it was like this. When we waltz into this place, a couple of papish cats is doing an Aztec two-step, and I says, "Dad, let's cut." But then this dame comes up behind me, see, and says, "You and me could really exist." "Wow," I says. Only the next day, she has bad teeth and really hates poetry. Well, I seem to be creeping back to my original New York accent, which I lost in California in some of these poems. This was one when I was some memory from when I was around New York as a kid, before the 3rd Avenue L was torn down. The penny candy store beyond the L is where I first fell in love with unreality. Jelly beans glowed in the semi-gloom of that September afternoon. A cat upon the counter moved among the licorice sticks and Tootsie Rolls and oh boy gum. Outside, the leaves were falling as they died. A wind had blown away the sun. A girl ran in. Her hair was rainy. Her breasts were breathless in the little room. Outside, the leaves were falling, and they cried, "Too soon, too soon." Get up to a few more recent ones in these selected poems. I don't know how many of you were followers of Ezra Pound. I saw Pound not long before he died in the Spoleto Festival in Italy. And this was a prose report that I sent to the old Saturday Review. Pound at Spoleto. I walked into the loge in the Teatro Melisso, the lovely Renaissance hall where the poetry readings and the chamber concerts were held every day of the Spoleto Festival, and suddenly saw Ezra Pound for the first time, still as a Mandarin statue in a box in a balcony at the back of the theater, one tier up from the stalls. It was a shock, seeing only a striking old man in a curious pose, thin and long-haired, aquiline at 80, head tilted strangely to one side, lost in permanent abstraction. After 3 younger poets on stage, he was scheduled to read from his box. And there he sat with an old friend who held his papers, waiting. He regarded the knuckles of his hands, moving them a very little, expressionless. Only once, when everyone else in the full theater applauded someone on stage, did he rouse himself to clap without looking up, as if stimulated by sound in a void. After almost an hour, his turn came, or after a life. Everyone in the hall rose, turned and looked back and up at Pound in his booth, applauding him. The applause was prolonged, and Pound tried to rise from his armchair. A microphone was partly in the way. He grasped the arms of the chair with his bony hands and tried to rise. He could not, and he tried again and could not, and tried again and could not. His old friend did not try to help him. Finally, she put a poem in his hand, and after at least a minute, his voice came out. First the jaw moved, and then the voice came out, inaudible. A young Italian pulled the mic up very close to his face and held it there, and the voice came over, frail but stubborn, higher than I had expected, a thin, soft monotone. The hall had gone silent at a stroke. The voice knocked me down, so soft, so thin, so frail, so stubborn still. Come to this. I put my head on my arms on the velvet sill of the box. I was surprised to see a single tear drop on my knee. The thin, indomitable voice went on. I went blind from the box, through the back door of it, into the empty corridor of the theater where they still sat turned to him, went down and out into the sunlight, weeping. Up above the town, by the ancient aqueduct, the chestnut trees were still in bloom. Mute birds flew in the valley far below. The sun shone on the chestnut trees, and the leaves turned in the sun, and turned and turned and turned, and would continue turning. His voice went on and on through the leaves. Along those lines, here's a poem which plays on some lines of Pound's. He had, this is called Baseball Canto. This is when the old San Francisco Giants with Willie Mays were still in the ballpark. Baseball Canto. Watching baseball, sitting in the sun, eating popcorn, reading Ezra Pound, and wishing Juan Marichal would hit a hole right through the Anglo-Saxon tradition in the first canto and demolish the barbarian invaders from Los Angeles. When the San Francisco Giants take the field and everybody stands up to the national anthem with some Irish tenor's voice piped over the loudspeakers, with all the players struck dead in their places and the white umpires like Irish cops in their black suits and little black caps pressed over their hearts, standing straight and still like at some funeral of a Blarney bartender, and all facing east as if expecting some great white hope or the founding fathers to appear on the horizon like 1066 or 1776 or all that. But Willie Mays appears instead in the bottom of the first, and a roar goes up as he clouts the first one into the sun and takes off like a foot runner from Thebes. The ball is lost in the sun, and maidens wail after him, but he keeps running through the Anglo-Saxon epic. And Tito Fuentes comes up, looking like a bullfighter in his tight pants and small pointed shoes. And the right field bleachers go mad with Chicanos and blacks and Brooklyn beer drinkers. Sweet Tito! Saki to him, sweet Tito! And sweet Tito puts his foot in the bucket and smacks one that don't come back at all and flees around the bases like he's escaping from the United Fruit Company. As the gringo dollar beats out the pound, And sweet Tito beats it out like he's beating out usury, not to mention fascism and anti-Semitism. And Juan Marichal comes up, and the Chicano bleachers go loco again as Juan belts the first fastball out of sight and rounds first and keeps going, and rounds second and rounds third and keeps going, and hits pay dirt to the roars of the grungy populace. As some nut presses the backstage panic button for the tape-recorded national anthem again to save the situation. But it don't stop nobody this time in their revolution round the loaded white bases, in this last of the great Anglo-Saxon epics, in the territorio libre of baseball. Getting to slightly more recent here. This is, I wrote this on the Los Angeles freeway. I don't go down there very often. Fly over it to get to Mexico. That's about it. But this, somehow I got trapped on this freeway, and this poem resulted. Lost parents. It takes a fast car to lead a double life. In these days of short-distance love affairs, when he has far-out lovers in 3 different locations and a date with each one at least twice a week, a little simple arithmetic shows what a workout he's engaged in. Crossing and recrossing the city, from bedroom to patio to swimming pool, the ignition key hot, and the back seat a jumble of clothes for different lifestyles, a surfboard on the roof, and a copy of Khalil Gibran or Rod McEwen under the dashboard. Next to the Indian music cassettes, packs of tarot and the I Ching crammed into the glove compartment, along with old traffic tickets and hard packs of Kents, dents attesting to the passion of his last lover. And his answering service catching him on the freeway between 2 calls or 2 encounter groups, and the urgent message left with an unlisted number to call Carol about the bottle of fine wine he forgot to pick up and deliver to the gallery for the reception at 9, while she shuttles to her gynecologist and will meet him later between 2 other numbers, including his wife, who also called twice, wanting to know where he's been and what he's done with their throwaway children, who, left to their own devices in a beach house at Malibu, grew up and dropped out into nothing in a Jungian search for lost parents their own age. I don't know whether this is a companion poem or not. It happens to follow the last one in the book. People getting divorced and riding around with their clothes in the car and wondering what happened to everyone and everything, including their other pair of shoes. And if you spy one, then who knows what happened to the other with tongue-a-lack. And years later, not even knowing if the other ever found a mate without splitting the seams or remained intact, unlaced. And the soul, the soul, a curious conception, hanging on somehow to walk again in the free air once the heel has been replaced. This is another car poem, and it's San Francisco this time. As I say, I get visual turn-ons which make a lot of my poems. 2 scavengers in a truck, 2 beautiful people in a Mercedes. At the stoplight, waiting for the light, 9 a.m. downtown San Francisco, a bright yellow garbage truck with two garbage men in red plastic blazers standing on the back stoop, one on each side hanging on and looking down into an elegant open Mercedes with an elegant couple in it. The man in a hip three-piece linen suit with shoulder-length blonde hair and sunglasses. The young blonde woman so casually dressed with a short skirt and colored stockings on the way to his architect's office. And the two scavengers up since 4 a.m., grungy from their route on the way home. The older of the two with gray iron hair and hunched back, looking down like some gargoyle Quasimodo. And the younger of the two, also with sunglasses and long hair, about the same age as the Mercedes driver. And both scavengers gazing down as from a great distance at the cool couple, as if they were watching some odorless TV ad in which everything is always possible. And the very red light for an instant holding all four close together, as if anything at all were possible between them across that great gulf in the high seas of this democracy. It happens after I wrote the poem, it occurred to me that the scavengers probably had more ready cash in their pockets than the architect. But I wouldn't want to spoil the poem with truth. Carrying things too far. This poem somehow got in the New York Times, but it's such a New York poem. It's like I remember seeing this when I was 20 years old or sometime, or yesterday. Still the same. Retired ballerinas, Central Park West. Retired ballerinas on winter afternoons, walking their dogs in Central Park West, or their cats on leashes, the cats themselves old high-wire artists. The ballerinas leap and pirouette through Columbus Circle, while winos on park benches, laid back like drunken Gudanovs, hear the taxis trumpet together like horsemen of the apocalypse in the dusk of the gods. It is the final witching hour, when swains are full of swan songs, and all return through the dark dusk to their bright cells in glass high-rises, or sit down to oval cigarettes and cakes in the Russian tea room, or climb 4 flights to back rooms in West Side brownstones, where faded playbill photos fall peeling from their frames like last year's autumn leaves. One more from this book, which is actually, this poem is part of a little book called Northwest Ecologue, which I wrote keeping a notebook on a trip in the old VW bus up the west coast through Oregon with my son Lorenzo when he was about 12. This is just one poem from that book. This is a prose piece, actually. Into the deeper pools. I put on the diving mask and went down. A few feet below the surface, a few minnows circled me. A little further down, a few small trout, no more than 3 inches. I lie motionless just below the surface and search the deepest part of the pool. There at the very bottom, between boulders in the very deepest hole, I suddenly spy him, a huge, fat, gray, speckled trout, perhaps 8 pounds, perfectly still against the gray rocks. He would have been invisible from the surface and invisible without the mask. Then suddenly I see another fat, speckled trout, not quite as big, quite close to the first, almost like his shadow or her shadow. This one, too, perfectly motionless, as if not even breathing, though the swift stream poured by above it. Summer of the great drought, and this the only deep pool left. The stream itself shrunk to a width of 20 feet. The pool isolated by rapids at each end. Last season, the 2 fish must have made it up this far. Then the stream shrunk still more, And here they were caught in the shrinking hole, where they lay motionless, waiting, trapped, their world shrinking and shrinking. Still they lie at the bottom, very still, conserving what they've got. Fishermen don't have diving masks and never see them down there and pass on quickly. As we dive down again and again and see the fish in their steady state of meditation, a final yoga discipline, which could go on until there is no water at all left in the stream. Then we might find them still in swimming position, fins extended, mouth slightly open, eyes half closed. Or still later we might find their skeletons intact in the same positions, baked in the fiery sun like Buddhist monks burned alive in lotus positions. Or still much later, another age might discover 2 fossil skeletons imprinted on the boulders at the very bottom of the crypt as evidence of some former strange form of a thing called life. And if we stayed on here with them, waiting and waiting, that later age might also not be able to imagine one boy and his father fishing by this stream, though our 2 round skulls be found with the fishes. Yet, seeing now the beauty of those fish down there below the surface, so still and lovely in their deep dream, dappled in their last deep pool, we fish no longer, turn and go on into the deeper pools of our own lives. This is a part of the ritual. You have to watch me do this. I'm going to read from Overall the Obscene Boundaries, which is European poems. That is, poems I wrote in Europe, France, Italy, or Amsterdam, or in between. Might as well read the poem that has a title in it first. It's a short poem. This is just coming out this fall from New Directions. Oh, thanks. This is How Clear Your Voice from Belgrade. It must be here somewhere. How clear your voice from Belgrade. Young friend, when you rang up, your voice so clear. You might have been downstairs in this Milan hotel, not across 3 sets of mountains and 30 rivers, not across 3 ideologies and 3 languages, not across various curtains made of heavy metal and static. How clear your voice from Belgrade. I hope mine is that clear. I can almost see your voice sailing through the Cimabue blue, over the mountains and rivers, a white bird winging its way high over, as in a Magritte painting, flying out of the deep cobalt blue, out of which bombs are made. A great white bird flying straight over, as the dove might make it after all, over all the obscene boundaries, your voice so clear. Bella Cati, Bella Catalina. Well, as long as I'm in Milan, I'll read a poem that happened. Like these are all true stories. I hope. With as little falsification as possible. Ristorante Vittoria, Milano. 3 bald-headed men at the next table speaking accented English, which is native to none of them. Maybe 2 are Italian and 1 is from Egypt and doesn't know the bella lingua. They are discussing deep-sea mining. 1,000 meters down, nodules. Perhaps I should report it to the CIA, that international terrorist group. Suspicious discussion in American, the language of the conquerors, the Latin of our days. We are alone in the restaurant, among the linen-covered tables and the huge silver. I decide at length that they are all Italian, putting me on for some perverse reason. I decide to pretend I don't understand the strange language they are talking, maintaining an inscrutable and urbane countenance, like some debonair expatriate character in Henry James, putting my meat in my mouth with the fork in the left hand in the continental manner, having read an international spy novel in which the American fugitive gives himself away by changing his fork back to his right hand before raising it to his mouth. I am seriously pursuing this line of endeavor, of behavior, as the three men with bald nodules continue their seemingly serious discussion about the deep sea off the coast of Abyssinia, though at any moment we might all burst out in riotous laughter at the ludicrous absurdity of the whole charade. I don't know. I'm not so sure that's a poem. This is definitely a poem. Firenze, a lifetime later, or Florence, a lifetime later. A cavatina of broken parlando utterances, punctuated by sighs, was the sound of the river Arno passing through that Tuscan countryside that evening, as we lay on a grass bank, trailing our hands in the ochre waters, as if we were students again, just hitchhiked down from Paris, and as if this dreamt reenactment might have the same ending again as that first time we returned to the same pensione and made love in the same room to the dark tremolo of the same doves, only this time our lives not shaken by our coming. I haven't read many of these poems aloud before. That was one of them. I find sometimes a poem will make it on the printed page and it won't make it aloud, or vice versa. Well, to continue with a couple of more poems from the Italian section, there's a pagan stone called the Bocca della Verità, which is in Rome. It's a big stone which is set up in the portico of a Christian church, and it's the mouth of a lion, and it has a hole in the middle of the stone. And it's interesting because the Catholic Church has adapted it to its own confessional purposes. The pagan myth was that you put your hand into the mouth of truth, the Bocca della Verità, and if you're hiding a lie, it will bite off your hand. So the Catholic Church adapted it for its confessional. I mean, you can't hide anything confessional. Well, I was there one day and I got this poem passing by. The mouth of truth. Is this the mouth of truth? In the face of this woman walking across the piazza Bocca della Verità, where the great round stone is set up in the portico of the church of Santa Maria in Cosmoden, her little feet taking her past the temple of the Virgins, past the temple of the Phallus, and past the street of the Misericordia. She has not been kneeling in any church. She trots along on her 2 high heels. She has smart rhinestone glasses and silk pants very well cut. She has a sweet face spoiled by lipstick, a botched attempt at something but the truth. She could be the daughter of a Shaw, but she isn't. She's some secretary, late at the office. The boss was beastly tonight. Her mouth must have answered. Those rouged lips could cope with any tongue. She's tough in a way, but not so tough. She has her soft spots. Her lower lip is very sensitive. You can tell there are other soft places from that. She has her cigarette lit in her right hand, the same hand she may have put into the mouth of truth, that great round pagan stone at the mouth of the church, which will bite off your hand if you're hiding some lie. She did not put her head into the mouth of the lion. Her left hand has rings in the wrong places. She doesn't have a boyfriend this year, but she has her cigarette. You can tell it is a close friend the way she fondles it. It is a filter tip. She is looking forward to lying down on her bed in the dark, in her slip, with the window open. There is a tree outside. In the morning, a bird. She is smoking her cigarette, her mouth of truth around the filter, which has filtered out all but the truth. The truth will come through. The truth will out. The mouth fall open when she's asleep on her back, by the open window, by the tree with its leaves like lips. The lower lip, so sensitive, will quiver. The throat utter some deep sound. The tongue, mute messenger, with its speechless truth. To whom will she tell it? In what dream? And what dark dove with flickering tongue passed below the far horizon of her longing? This is on a boat going to a little island off the coast of Tuscany. The light. Couples on the boat to the Isola di Giglio in the Tuscan archipelago. Wrapped up in each other. What does he see in her and her in him? He strokes her leg. She loves him. What a look she lays on him. I love you. It's a mystery. It continues. There's an old pescatore watching them. He wishes he were him. Obviously, he's come a long way. The old fisher with his face like Sicily, with his hands like crabs. He would like to haul her in with his net. But his net already has too many fish in it. He's already hauled it in too many times, with big old ones and little ones stuck in the net, his familia. Still he eyes the Venus on the hook as if it were his, as if he had caught it and didn't quite know what to do with it. It's the eternal mystery. Fat legs she has, but a face from a Greek coin. The light of Greece in it. Ah, yes, that's it. The light in the eyes, in spite of all. Fat legs and dim brain, tuttavia. It's the light that counts, the light that attracts the fish at night. This is John Lennon in the Porto Santo Stefano. A trattoria in the Porto. An astonishingly beautiful couple enters the restaurant in shorts. He's got a fantastic torso, long hair and golden headband. She's got long flaxen hair, German hippies maybe, bourgeois back home. Another couple saunters in and joins them, dark hair and jeans, comme ils sont beaux. Not one of them is gay, though he's the most beautiful. He's got such a smile. Some story he's telling. What could it be? Something about John Lennon, lost in a mix of Tuscan and German. Comme elle est belle, with her empty eyes. The Germans very spaced out. The Italians very together. But none of them look very happy. Perhaps it's just youth. I'm trying to think of a Lennon line to sum up the situation. There isn't any. He didn't live long enough to give us the mad eternal answer. Well, I get to some of the French poems here. This is a couple I observed in a cafe, Cafe Notre Dame. They say, best place of all to get poems. Cafe Notre Dame. A sort of sexual trauma has this couple in its thrall. He is holding both her hands in both his hands. She is kissing his hands. They are looking in each other's eyes up close. She has a fur coat made of 100 running rabbits. He is wearing a formal dark coat and dove gray trousers. Now they are inspecting the palms of each other's hands as if they were maps of Paris or of the world, as if they were looking for the metro which would take them together through subterranean ways, through the stations of desire, to love's final terminals at the ports of the city of light. It is a terminal case, but they are losing themselves in the crisscrossing lines of their intertwined palms, their headlines and heart lines, their fate lines and lifelines, illegibly entangled in the mons veneris of their passion. Okay, I'm being a voyeur in this poem. Women in rooms. Seeing women in small rooms is not the same as being with women anywhere else. It is something about the womb of the affair. I look across the night courtyard and see through the curtains an intimate interior. Two women move about in it, slowly, gravely, lightly, their gestures at once transparent and profound. I am a voyeur of their erotic, ordinary lives. I am inside their lives, inside their bodies, inside their eyes, where lies the mystery. Of a sudden, the light goes out, like a candle blown, and they with it, like moths blown out onto a dark landscape. I have a poem about a couple I saw in the Belgian railroad station. If I can find it here, it would fit in at this point. At the Gare Bruxelles Midi, Brussels station. Two people saying goodbye, not saying it, saying nothing in the station at noon, in the Gare Bruxelles Midi. Not a word between them. They're both looking straight ahead. Their hands are clasped on the cafe table, all four hands together, as in a children's hand game. Their hands are big. The man and the woman are not so big. They are gray and green, middle-aged, nondescript, but distinguished. Even their skins seem gray. He has the air of a little functionaire, a little bureaucrat somewhere. It is he who is taking the train, perhaps back to his wife in France. The woman here is a little younger, but far from young. Maybe he's French, she's Belge. A wartime romance, perhaps. Now, 40 years after, they're still meeting across borders. Their four hands, like the four wings of two doves, folded together, unable to fly away from each other. Very capable hands, capable of a lot of things, but not of saying goodbye, not even of waving goodbye. Their hands are mute as mouths. He stands up,